Good day, and welcome to the Plant Engineering Webcast, Navigating Hiring Amid a Changing Workforce, sponsored by Dude Solutions. I'm your moderator, Kevin Parker, and I'm happy to join you today on behalf of Plant Engineering. Here are some tips to help you get the most from today's webcast. For issues with the slides or audio, refresh your browser or click the Refresh Media button under the presenter's picture. Control the volume by adjusting the volume on your computer or on that of the platform. For technical problems with the audio or slides, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of the screen to access a list of system checks to try before contacting an online technician. If you do need a technician, type a message in the Ask a Question box, and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Type questions for our speaker in the Ask a Question box as well. The live Q&A session begins after the presentation concludes. Today's webcast is being recorded. You will receive an email within a week with the link to the on-demand event. To download a certificate of completion, a PDF copy of the presentation, and additional resources, use the Event Resources tab on the left-hand side of the screen. These resources will also be available with the webcast's on-demand version. Now happy to introduce today's presenter, Paul LaChance. Paul LaChance's career has been devoted to optimizing maintenance teams by enabling data-driven decisions and actionable insights. He wrote his first computerized maintenance management system in 2004 and has since worked designing and directing computerized maintenance management systems and enterprise asset management systems. A regular speaker at national trade shows, Paul's been featured at IMTS, FabTech, and SMRP, as well as in industry magazine. He currently serves as the Senior Manufacturing Advisor for Dude Solutions. Thanks for joining us today, Paul. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here to present to you all on a beautiful day here in Maine. Today we're going to be talking about why there are so many help wanted signs with manufacturers, which is really a testament to a number of really amazing things that are all happening at the same time. It's sort of a collision course. We have the lingering impacts of this pandemic that I'm thankful to say we're putting in the rearview mirror. We also have an aging workforce and a skills gap, and these things all coming together, creating a collision course that are largely to blame for these help wanted signs. We'll also talk about some cultural changes that I think will be very beneficial to this industry, some methodologies and best practices which can help. And of course, technology is an excellent insurance policy that can help you operate more lean and more efficient. So just a slide about Dude Solutions. You can see from the data on here, we've been around going on 22 years, I believe is the number now. Lots of experience around asset management, work order management, CMMS in the manufacturing and other industries. Tremendous amount of number of records that we've put through our system with a ton of clients through the years. So Dude Solutions has got great experience optimizing maintenance operations teams. I will be featuring our Asset Essentials CMMS, Computerized Maintenance Management System, which is a full-fledged CMMS that handles asset management, work orders management, inventory, and spare parts. We won't get too much into the product today, but if you're interested in our solutions, there'll be an opportunity, as Kevin said, where you can reach out. And just to make sure today we keep everybody awake, I'm going to pepper in some trivia questions. And you have an opportunity after I read the question. There'll be a pop-up on your screen where you can put an answer. So we're going to fire it off right off the bat with the first trivia question. So in 1735, and for those history buffs, some people will say this is 1736. I'm going with 1735. Who famously said, quote, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure"? So you should be seeing on your screen a pop-up where you can take, and I'm going to let everybody have a second or two here to look at that. And I'm already seeing a bunch of responses come in. And it looks like I'm going to give everybody another 15 or so seconds. Thankfully, nobody dropped in the Mary Poppins. That's good to see. The answer is, if you just give me a second here, I'll get back to my screen. The answer is Mr. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin grew up in Boston, but he relocated to Philadelphia at a pretty young age, 1735, and he was really had some issues with how poor firefighting was in that city, especially compared to his hometown. And he really advocated for improving training for the locals, both, there was just basically homeowners and business owners were doing all the firefighting, having better buckets, training around that. And most importantly, prevention. So he was the guy who said, well, you got to sweep your chimneys. If you sweep your chimneys, you're not going to have the fires in the first place. So what this an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure has become the mantra for maintenance organizations, a lesson that we still talk about today. So excellent job. I know some of you put another answer there, but Ben Franklin. Okay, help wanted signs. Let's start by first taking a little pulse check on what is going on with manufacturing. How is U.S. manufacturing doing? If you look at this little chart right here on the left-hand side, there's two lines being drawn. The blue line is called the U.S. Manufacturing PMI Index, Purchasing Managers Index, and it's an excellent barometer of how well manufacturing is doing. It comes out once a month. The June number just came out a couple of days ago. It comes out July 1st. The June number came out. But any number below 50 is considered contraction. Any number above 50 is considered expansion. So if you look on that left-hand side here, that first gray block where that PMI dropped below. By the way, I've overlaid the S&P 500 over this so you can see sort of a correlation to one version of the stock market. In mid-2019, that's when we entered the U.S.-China trade wars, the tariffs. And that actually, despite the economy doing pretty well, the manufacturing world was hit kind of hard from that. Supply chain issues and a number of other turbulence lasted fairly long. We were just getting out of it in the beginning of 2020. And then, of course, wham, we get sucker punched with COVID-19. Saw one of the largest drops we've seen in the PMI in a long time, steep and deep. But fortunately, and almost inexplicably, that recession in manufacturing didn't last very long. By the middle of 2020, despite we are still in the absolute throes of this global pandemic with all kinds of issues, which we'll talk about, that manufacturing index climbed out. And we have started to hit absolute all-time highs in this manufacturing index. So I think most of you who are listening to this webinar today, you've known how busy you've been, but it's real kudos to this industry despite some major headwinds. We are looking at some turbulence with this help wanted. And I won't go through this entire slide, but basically we lost a bunch of jobs. We are losing a bunch of jobs due to retirement. And we have a whole bunch of new jobs just coming in naturally. There are 4 million expected jobs to fill in this decade. We're going to fill some of them naturally, 1.9 million, but 2.1 million unfilled jobs in the next decade due to the skills gap. This is from an excellent study done by Deloitte. And it's getting harder to find the right talent. It is 1.4 times harder to find somebody today than it was just about 2.5, 3 years ago. And we'll talk about some of those reasons as we move forward. 68% of manufacturers believe there is a skills gap. I don't think that's a surprise really to anybody. But the top reasons for these skill gaps is 38% of people just aren't even thinking about getting into the manufacturing and related industry. 36%, we're just not reaching out to our younger generation, the parents or the students. They just don't think about going into manufacturing. Well, of course, we have a lot of baby boomers retiring, and we've sort of dropped off our training programs, our STEM talent and our shop classes, and even on the job training. So there's a number of reasons why it hurts not to fill these roles. Again, I'll let you look through this on your own and just cherry pick them. You just can't get work done as well when we're having such a hard time filling these roles. You can't respond to new markets. You can't implement new technology as easily. You have a hard time creating new products. So there are consequences to not be able to fill these jobs. Three major forces: the aging workforce, the skills gap, and the global pandemic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of step through these, talk about them in a little more detail, and most importantly, talk about some ways that you can help you handle this situation better. So let's talk about the aging workforce first. Well, we are an older society. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 or older by the age of 2030. And it's really the baby boomers. You know, we talk about the baby boomers. They're retiring. They're retiring at massive levels in all sectors at the rate of about 10,000 per day. And according to this statistical analysis, that'll last until essentially the last baby boomers have retired. That'll be around 2035. So we've got another 12, 13 years that we're going to be seeing these sort of mass exodus from the workforce from these baby boomers. And for the first time, we are seeing 25% of manufacturing workers are over the age of 55. We're actually one of the oldest industries, primarily because the manufacturing sector is pretty mature in this country. So there's been people in those roles for a long time. We have more people over the age of 55 than we do the younger generation in this sector. Meet Susan and Chuck. Everybody probably has a Susan and a Chuck in their operations. Susan, administrator, she knows every work order in the system. She knows every supplier, every contractor. She knows every nook and cranny of the building. You go to Susan for whatever you need to learn about your operations, about your team. Chuck is that guy who's been there for 20, 30, in some cases 40 years. Chuck's the guy that can change that bearing set blindfolded in a snowstorm if he has to. Chuck's the guy you go to when you need to learn how to change that bearing set, or probably just about any other nuance or any other maintenance routine within your operations. The challenge we have is we're losing the Susans and the Chucks. Historical knowledge is lost when Chucks and Susans leave your team. That's that brain drain. You'll often hear it called the brain drain. When Chuck retires and you can't go to him to how to change that bearing set, well, that's a real problem for many of us. Investments in trade jobs has dropped as well. You see that chart on the screen, another Deloitte chart. Those bright red circles are places in the country where you're finding better programs, training programs, apprenticeships, and so forth. And you see it's largely concentrated in the upper Midwest, where there happens to be a lot of manufacturing. The problem is where we have some of the fastest growing manufacturing, like Texas and California, we don't have nearly enough training programs in these areas. So we're getting the brain drain from the people like Chuck and Susan, and we're not necessarily having the people that can come in and to take that. The pandemic is also a lingering impact. So the pandemic, and we lost a lot of jobs at the beginning of the pandemic, almost 1.5 million jobs. I mean, that was shuttered factories and just really chaos. I mean, we were all there. We all saw it. Certain industries absolutely hammered and have yet to recover. But even in industries that really needed to create goods and services, we lost a lot of people during that time. We've recovered a whole bunch of those jobs, but we have a gap to make up. 570,000 jobs. And just for reference, it took us almost 6 years to fill 600,000 jobs leading up to the last run-up in manufacturing. So, I mean, we all know we had difficulties just because of the pandemic and the factories. And it also created challenging business environments, the supply chain, forecasting demand, changing markets. We moved to a very durable goods, manufacturing heavy world, away from services and industry to support entertainment and food and beverage and things of that nature. What was interesting about the pandemic when it first came, it was also a teaser to the aging workforce. our susceptible population, the older generation, was far more likely to have to stay out of work or really had to adhere to strict social distancing when they're in the office. So many of us, the Chucks maybe just weren't around as much because we were worried about their health. So it was a bit of a teaser. Many of us probably experienced that. And there was probably a lot of on-the-job quick training for people to learn things. So again, the pandemic, the impact, and I don't want to make this sound like this is all bad news. We learn a lot of things. We're going to talk about what we've learned from this and how we can improve. But before we get into that, I'm going to pop up my next trivia question. Which U.S. founding father championed manufacturing and infrastructure? Now, I know there's probably a number of names that you could probably pin to this, but this person really stood out as a champion of championing manufacturing. So as these numbers start to tally here, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time here to figure out this. I'm seeing all kinds of votes. I don't even want to give it away because I don't want anybody to think. All right, I'm going to give everybody another moment or so. Very interesting. We have, right now, it's neck and neck between Samuel Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and a bit of a distance third is Alexander Hamilton and James Ross, and I don't see a single vote for Betsy Ross. So as I close out this survey, we have Thomas Jefferson as the overwhelming person there. The problem with that is it's not Thomas Jefferson, it's Alexander Hamilton. Yes, the same totally hot Disney show guy as well, which I just watched for the first time. Amazing if you haven't seen it. Alexander Hamilton in 1791 authored what was called the Report on Manufacturers. It had a longer name. You can see the cover of the book right there. And I'm going to just read a quote he says in that book. Bet on manufacturing, technologies, infrastructure, commerce, corporations, finance, and banks, and government support of innovation. That's one of his famous quotes from that report. Alexander Hamilton understood the importance of U.S. manufacturing to give us more strength, more control of our economy. And even more importantly, he understood how important having proper infrastructure is to do that. In the case back then, it was canals and ports, roads, a little bit of a distant third because roads were so primitive back then. But it's very interesting to me to hear the similarities of what Alexander Hamilton talked about back in 1791, before and after that period of time. It's almost directly appropriate for the conversations in the U.S. we find ourselves today. So I stumped you on that one, but there'll be two more other opportunities later. Okay, the skills gap. So the skills gap, I mean, any of the people on this webinar today who've been around the block for a few years like me, when you worked in a manufacturing environment back in the day, there was a lot of analog gauges. You kind of did maintenance by, you could kind of see, hear, feel, smell. You could touch or be near an asset and think this thing's running a bit hot. Today, the tools, the assets, the technology that you use is quite different. No longer, you still see a whole lot of analog thermometers on assets, don't get me wrong. But you also start to see digital thermal cameras, some of which might even be directly tied into your computer systems as you use them. So it's sort of an example of how things are starting to change. And we as a manufacturing world really have to embrace that and make sure we arm our people with that. We talked about the little image on the left there already. The skills gap is right now tentatively being blamed for a gap of 2.1 million jobs over the next decade. And if you look at the jobs on the right-hand side, and again, I want to be clear, most of these roles with a skills gap are more tied to those middle level positions, especially those that are going to involve levels of technology. And you can just look through that list. Technology will be an impact in all of these different roles, just the way the modern factory and the sort of digital revolution that we're going through. The skills gap, in my opinion, is actually three separate buckets. We've got the technical skills, the example would being the digital thermal camera. We've got to get our people trained up on those. There's also soft skills. It's the first time in our history that we have theoretically 5 generations of people working together. How you talk to an 18-year-old kid just coming out of a trade skills program is going to be a little different than how you communicate with the Chucks of the world. So just collaboration and all those quote unquote soft skills, which will make our operations better if you can communicate better. We need to work on that. And of course, the digital skills, and that's that whole software world that we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation. Now, I don't want to just keep talking about the doom and gloom about these help wanted signs. There are solutions. And some of these solutions, I'm going to give you a little preview. I can't tell you where to find a whole lot of additional people to fill those help wanted signs. The goal is lean. The goal is doing more with less. The goal is not being as vulnerable as you're trying to fill these positions. So, but let's talk about first where we can find that next generation of workers. So how are organizations finding the new people? Creating or expanding internal training programs. So this was a survey done by the National Association of Manufacturers. And so you'll see that they don't add up to 100% because this is the different places each company will be trying to do this. So tapping your own people, but putting them through internal training programs. And I emphasize the word true training programs. Working existing workforce more, overtime, running more shifts. It's more shifts. Not sustainable in my opinion, but hey, you got to do what you got to do. Temporary staffing services, again, you can get the help. It's typically not a long-term sustainable because of the higher cost levels. Collaborating with educational institutions on skills certification programs. We're seeing that a lot here in the state of Maine. The community college system in Maine has been for many years now, really working with local businesses and developing skills programs in there, graduating people that are going right into that workforce. I hope you are seeing that in your geographic region. If you're not, you need to get your voice heard. There's great people around that can fill these roles. They just need the programs to do it. Phased retirements, having people stay longer. So there's other places a little deeper on that. I would love to see the local institutions number a lot higher on this. But again, we're just getting into this. So you also can try to retain your talent. How can you keep the team that you have? Ergonomic adjustments is something to seriously consider, or technology to assist, robotics, for example. Now, we can't get a robot to replace our maintenance operations. Robotics are much more for the other aspects of our operations. But there are ways to look at ergonomic adjustments, and some of them are quite simple. One of the ones that I read about in a study was stairs. Your older generation has a harder time going up and down stairs. Now, if you have a lot of multiple floor situations, can that be adjusted? I don't know. It's something to consider, but that's one area to consider. Another one I heard about is people, older generation. This was an auto manufacturer that had a production line that they were having a lot of hard time getting people that were older to work on that production line because there was a lot of overhead work. They had to have their arms in the air. So a combination of getting things lower, having good pads on the floor so it's easier on your feet. So little changes like that can go a long way. So people are more comfortable and less likely to leave. Changing to different positions internally, finding positions that are just easier on their bodies and make them more likely to stay. Phased retirements or flexible hours, or even returning part-time or through project contracting, especially those Chucks of the world who know everything, and culture changes, which we'll get into in a bit. It doesn't matter how old you are. Everybody is a student. Everybody's a teacher. And we can learn from everybody about how we can make these environments better. You got to capture the legacy knowledge of your team. When Chuck retires, that brain drain that goes with him, don't let it happen. Upper left-hand corner, that's a list of the preventive maintenance routines for this company. Bottom center, step-by-step instructions, detailed instructions. Chuck does this blindfolded. He doesn't need to read these instructions. But what's the next best thing? Good typed up instructions with, better yet, videos or pictures of Chuck performing those tasks. A good CMMS is going to allow you to capture that. So you've got to capture that brain drain and get it into your software. Any of your documentation, safety data sheets, safety programs, lockout tagout procedures, job safety assessments, get them in your CMMS so that they're readily available, especially for those people who are new. Next solution we'll talk about is how you can optimize your team. So again, regardless of your age or background, everybody is going to need training. Technology, for example. The new people just coming out of trade schools, trade programs, especially if these trades programs get right into the technology that they might be using on your plant floor, those people, they probably won't need nearly the training. But the Chucks and the Susans of the world, who are not nearly as comfortable working with mobile devices and digital thermal cameras and digital devices in general, they need training. Like, conversely, your preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance routines. Again, it comes back to the Chuck's legacy and all of Chuck's associates. You really have to make sure that you've got good documentation and training around those really standard roles that people perform. Okay, you take it for granted with the older generation who've been in these roles for a long time, even understanding the layout of your facilities, building good asset hierarchies in your CMMS, a breakdown from the campus level down to the building level, down to the production lines, all the way down to the assets, sub-assets, bill of materials for the parts. You really want to structure that well in your technology, especially in your CMMS. People know exactly where to go to do that maintenance and know everything about those assets they need to know. And as I said before, those soft skills, communication, collaboration, listening, and critical thinking. A lot of people just kind of roll their eyes when they think about training on these things. I mean, I have a hard time talking to my 18 and 20-year-old kids about certain things. In a professional environment where it's really critical that you work as a team, that you develop those skills. The better we collaborate, the better we communicate, the more we can get done. These are fundamental things in a lean operating environment. So don't minimize the importance of looking at those soft skills trainings. When you're training your people, when you're introducing new technologies, highlight the benefits. It's really an awful situation. Some of the worst situations I've seen in my professional career when a trainer shows up from say, Dude Solutions or any software company, they show up on a Monday to train a group of people on how they're going to use their CMMS. And it's the first time 3/4 of the room has even heard they're going to be doing that technology. If you can highlight the benefits in advance, make sure they understand, hey, we're going through a transition. We really need to look at how we're going to be doing our maintenance operations. What can you tell me about what works well and doesn't work well? We need to make sure that gets included in the conversations about setting up our CMMS. Highlight those benefits. If you do it in advance, you're going to find champions of those people who absorb it. They realize, you know what, my mobile device with my CMMS is just as important to me as a multimeter or a crescent wrench. Those champions, they'll welcome that new technology, and better yet, they're going to encourage and help train others. They become the ambassadors. Those champions are really valuable. And if you can just make sure you highlight those benefits and include them early, it really helps. And of course, provide training. External, then that's where we come in and help train you on a CMMS or whatever systems you're using, or also internal sources. Who can they go to if they're not sure how to do something with this new technology? Don't let them just get frustrated and curse it. Make sure they have resources. Another solution is to leverage software. Now, we can't help you fill the roles of all these vacant positions, but we can help you improve and optimize your lean operations. Lean is doing more with less. It's just about really capitalizing on the people you have. It doesn't mean work them harder. It means work smarter. Upper left-hand corner, that's just that work order center there. That's on the dashboard. It shows you, if I log into my CMMS, I know exactly how many work orders I have to do today. Both preventive maintenance, non-preventive maintenance, how many are overdue. I know how many my team has open right now. I've got that great visibility, parts I need to order. I can drill in right-hand side. I can drill into those work orders and see what people are doing. And better yet, put them in a really properly ordered, calculated criticality. You see that highlighted with that red box. Most people will schedule their PMs based on just a straight priority. Priority is obviously important, but priority must be combined with the criticality of the asset. The combination of the two will give you a calculated criticality, also called a RIME index, R-I-M-E. The lower the number in asset essentials, the more important that work order is. And you see here in that list there, I've got a high priority work order that's lower ranked than a medium because that asset is more critical. The medium priority work order, it's just a more critical asset. So you can really intelligently look at your prioritization. These are key things in lean operations. Set goals like your ratio of preventive to corrective maintenance, bottom left-hand corner. Am I within target of my PM to corrective maintenance ratio? If I'm not, I need to dive in and look. Analytics, so essential to help you identifying those bad actors, the sources of downtime, and how effective our team is. Having the ability to, on the right-hand side there, to see your team. Are they properly utilized? Some people are overutilized there. They're in red. Some are underutilized. They're in green. Don't throw more work on Jay. He's already overworked. Give it to Andrew or Ernie or Charles. They could handle more work. Again, lean operations aided through technology. Look at your PMs into the future so you can kind of work around production. The right-hand side there, mobile. Mobile devices are awesome. Like I said, you should have your mobile device right there in your tool belt because you can pull up every work order. You can pull up every emergency procedure. You can pull up that video of Chuck changing that bearing set. All right. Next trivia question. How many industrial revolutions have we had so far? You all know the drill at this point. So I'll give you all, and if you're not sure what an industrial revolution is, well, you can take a guess, but I'll go ahead and give everybody a moment here to put their answers in. Got a pretty good split right now. I'm not going to say with what, because I don't want to give anybody any hints. We've got 1 vote for 0. I like that. I guess I kind of gave a little hint on that. I'll give everybody a few more seconds. All right, I'll go ahead and got a pretty good mixture here between 2, 3, and 4, with 4 being the winner in terms of the votes here. And let's see if we go to the next slide. It is 4. There have been 4 industrial revolutions. The first one going back into the late 1800s. And really that first industrial revolution started because we figured out a way to harness mechanization. We no longer had to rely on just human power or beasts of burden to do work. We got steam, we got weaving looms, things of that nature, general mechanization. Industry 2.0, or the second industrial revolution, was the late 1800s, mass production. Assembly line, really helped by electrical energy. Y'all think of Henry Ford and the Model T and assembly lines as it was later in the 1900s, but same concept, just happened to start earlier. Industry 3.0 or the third industrial revolution started in the late 60s. That's where we started to have more automation with computers, electronics, robotics were a part of that. And today we are in the fourth industrial revolution, often called Industry 4.0. And it's all the previous industrial revolutions combined. It's just it now includes basically the Internet of Things. It's connecting everything together electronically with intelligence. What's interesting to note about every industrial revolution, they all started with a major technology shift. Mechanization, mass production, computers and electronics, and now that connectivity through the Internet of Things. All right, getting into a couple more solutions here. Lean or best practices. There are some amazing best practices. I'm only going to, there's only basically one slide on this as sort of a teaser, but 5S, if you don't know what 5S is, look it up. 5S is awesome. It's easy to implement, relatively speaking. Six Sigma, also awesome, not nearly as easy to implement. Kaizen, working Kaizen to solve problems. Total productive maintenance. You see the pillars of TPM there. All of these best practices tie directly in with the lean, continuous improvement mindset. And they all aid you to do more with less. It takes a lot of the guesswork out. So if you're not familiar with these, and if just because you're not familiar doesn't mean your organization may not be looking or doing some of these things, I highly recommend that you read, because continuous improvement, lean methodologies can be greatly added. And again, 5S, love it. You've all been doing 5S over the pandemic when you clean your garage and your attics and so forth. So it'll register well with you. But these can make a big difference to take away the sting of not having all those people or those trained people quite as much. Documentation is also a best practice. I have this in the technology. I also have it here in this best practices. As you change from hand to hand, digital documentation is critical. When Chuck can't be there, the next best thing is having Chuck's legacy right there. Work orders, preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance, good routines, the orientation, safety, really any operational tasks. Culture. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are DEI. You hear this a lot in today's day and age, thankfully. I'm going to just start with, we'll talk about women in manufacturing on the left-hand side there. Women only represent 30% of the workforce in manufacturing. They're 47% of the workforce in the general public. Women are also 1.8 times more likely to leave the industry. So we don't have enough working. And remember, we need people to fill these jobs. Women can do as good, if not better jobs than men. We have to attract them, but more importantly, we have to make it so they will stick. They come for attractive pay, benefits, and work-life balance. We're doing a decent job attracting them to the industry, but they're not sticking. So there's a disconnect. This slide right here, it's just, for you to recognize if you have DEI initiatives, you really have to take these into account and look at available resources. It's not just women. 63% of manufacturing executives surveyed believe they're doing well in an inclusive culture. I do believe that at the senior level, senior management levels in manufacturers, that there is training programs and conversations about DEI at that level. The problem is it's not translating to the general workforce. Female, Asian, African-American professionals, they're just not sticking with, even though we're putting these efforts in. That's a cultural problem that we have to solve in this industry. There is an amazing untapped wealth of workers out there. We have DEI initiatives and training and programs can really help. Got to lead from the top. And training is key. When I say the top, not just the CEO and the COO, I'm talking about all levels of management. You have to give that training. Now, fortunately, we no longer have this environment of overt bias and racism. I hope we don't see it in today's workplace, but there still is unconscious bias and microaggression. And these training programs will help people in an industry that they may not even know you're doing these things. The trainings will help. You got to measure your DEI initiatives. You can't fix what you're not measuring. And this is not only the right thing to do, it's good for business. We need to fill these roles. We need to go where the best workers can be, and they can be there regardless of race or gender or sexual orientation. Last solution section is technology. Technology is a big assist here. You're driving down the road with that car on the left, and it starts to shake and smoke comes out of that dashboard. You look at the dashboard, you have no idea what is wrong with that car. The car on the right, you're probably not going to be able to pull away from your parking spot if you're having a major problem with that car. The metrics, the information that's there. Your CMMS can do the same thing. As you move away from paper-based systems and capture your maintenance operations in a CMMS, that dashboard is just like the dashboard in that Tesla. You know where your problems are. You know where you need to focus. You know if you're on target with your goals. This is greatly assisted also with mobile solutions. For the first time, we're starting to see, at least at the technician level, more people are using their mobile device than their standard browser or paper and pencil with their maintenance work orders. So you can pull up that same information on that mobile device. You can make a work order. You can scan an asset's barcode and pull up the work orders, the emergency shutdown procedure, enter meter readings. It can really help give you right there in the palm of your hands, right when you're in front of that asset. You don't have to walk across the plant to get a spare part. You can look it up right there. When you talk about lean operations, doing more with less, when you don't have enough people, this really helps. Analytics, again, we talked about this same slide as before, but show you those bad actors. Where's your downtime coming from? What people need to have more training? What contractors are doing better than others? Am I on target with my goals? The CMMS benefits are a ton, just cherry picking a couple. At the end of the day, they're going to intelligently reduce maintenance related costs, and that will improve profitability. It's going to also reduce downtime, stretching the life of your assets. Premature retirement of assets is huge capital expense that you can avoid with a proactive culture. Improving the quality of your production, reducing waste and scrap and rework. It helps you identify bad actors and spotlight trends. It also can help you with your health and safety track record. So the value of CMMS, you may not need to add as many people as you think you do. It's a bold statement, but with lean operations aided through technology like CMMS, it really can make an impact. All right, last trivia question. In what decade was the first CMMS introduced? In what decade? And no, I wasn't working in that decade. Well, I guess I probably gave a little too much of a hint on that. So you can, you're going to get the pop-up. I'll give everybody a moment to put that in. Given the fact that it's computerized maintenance management, I'm guessing that one user, the person who put that vote in also had Mary Poppins in the other one. So it's kind of neck and neck right now with the 60s, 70s, and 80s. All right, I'll give everybody a final chance here. All right, let's go ahead and close it out. The votes, the number one votes were the 1980s, followed by the 1970s, and the third in line was the 1960s. Anybody guess the 90s, you must be really young. That makes me feel a little bit old. The answer is 1960s. Believe it or not, the original CMMS was done on punch cards. Those are those funny looking things in the upper left-hand corner. I actually worked with punch cards early in my schooling. It was kind of like a historical thing. That literally was how you programmed computers in the early days. In the 1960s, IBM mainframe computers, it was only the biggest of businesses and government agencies doing very basic maintenance around preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance. So, but yes, it was in the 1960s. On a side note, we have a great blog entry that goes through the history of CMMS all through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so forth. So it's been through a lot of major changes harnessing technology, but yeah, way back in the 1960s. Okay, we're going to do a final recap right here, and then we're going to have an opportunity for some Q&A. Last slide here. So there's some things you can control, and there's other things you can't. I'm here to tell you, lean, operating lean is always in fashion, good times or bad. Early in the pandemic, when shuttered factories and a completely screwed up supply chain, and maybe your orders were slowing down and so forth, you really have to lean on your technology, your CMMS, to really help you get through, because you may not be able to control that business coming in, and you got to try to just stretch every dollar you can operating lean. Likewise, if you made kettlebells or you made masks during the pandemic or hand sanitizer, you were busier than you could possibly imagine. You got to be firing on all cylinders. You got to have really good operations aided by the technologies, many of which we talked about today in this presentation. So good times or bad, your CMMS and other technologies can really help you. Don't wait. And especially don't wait. I mean, I don't want to say don't wait for the next pandemic or major world event. You are looking at a decade of a continued decline of people exiting the workforce. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be for you to fill those roles. Use these forces to your competitive advantage. Those of you who really harness these continuous improvement lean technologies to help you do more with less, to minimize the impact of these help wanted signs, will really help you competitively. When it's a continuous improvement process, if you're thinking to yourself, Paul, I'm listening to what you're saying here, I have no idea where to start, don't be intimidated. You use a crawl, walk, run process. Get yourself educated. Rely on Dude Solutions and other technology partners to help you with this. Get your team involved. Get their buy-in. That little bit of progress you're making, it's contagious. Next thing you know, you move from a crawl to a walk to a run, and you're operating more lean and effective. You're still going to need to fill those roles, and hopefully you got some good tidbits in this presentation. But that lean operations will really help you in this age and beyond. And again, Dude Solutions is here to help you through that process. Okay, that was my last slide. We are now at the Q&A portion. I think this is Kevin's cue to come in and...
Oh, that's right. So thanks so much, Paul. I really appreciate the presentation, and it was a good one. I have to confess I only got one of the trivia questions correct. So I think it was probably the late 70s before a lot of large manufacturers had CMMS systems. So maybe I'll get a little bit of leeway in that regard.
I'll give you partial credit, Kevin, partial credit.
All right, well, I'll take it. I need it. Paul, let me ask you a question. When you say baby boomers, how do you define a baby boomer?
You can Google a list of all the Gen Y, Gen X, whatever they're going to call the people born during the pandemic. The baby boomers, I like to say, it's all those people that came after the returning soldiers from World War II. It's people my parents' age and maybe a little bit younger, but there was a lot of people born in that first generation and that generation after the war, and they all entered that workforce many decades ago now, and they're all the ones that are really hitting that retirement age.
Right. I've heard it defined as anyone born between 1946 and 1964, but I think people in 1962 are... Some people born in 62 were surprised to find out that they're baby boomers. So I'm not sure how that applies. But you did raise some really important points about the lack of viable employees and the skills gap and the workforce issues that are impacting the manufacturing sector, especially. How confident are you that technology can be used to fill that skills gap, whether it be, cloud computing or remote operations or predictive maintenance?
I am 150% confident, and there's all kinds of data to support it. I'll illustrate with a simple example. The days of doing preventive maintenance on just a calendar, once a month you change a filter, regardless if the filter needed to be changed. Now you can set up some low-cost sensors that will indicate a delta on either side of the filter that tells you how clogged that filter is. You may not need to change that filter for 6 months or 2 months, or maybe you need to do it in 2 weeks. But that's less filters you're going to use. That's less of the technician's time to go and change that filter. It's less likely the filter is going to fail that asset prematurely because of the sensor preserving that asset. IoT, the Internet of Things, is the technology that feeds that data into the CMMS. So the days of having a person go do an inspection to make that change, and I'm not advocating that technology changes people's roles, but we know we don't have enough people. The next best thing we can do is to rely on that technology to tell us how our assets are feeling. So that's just the Internet of Things. Technology, in a variety of ways, just allows us to operate more intelligently and do more with less.
Good. And when it comes to something like artificial intelligence or machine learning incorporated into predictive maintenance, I mean, the data engineers and the data scientists are so in demand that a lot of them have been taken up by financials or insurance industries and others. And as you mentioned, the manufacturing industries don't have that same attraction. So are managed services on the part of maintenance vendors that include predictive maintenance, is that going to be the way that those kind of skills can be spread across a lot of different enterprises rather than just being restricted to a single one?
Yeah, I do. It is a shame that data scientists, software developers, engineer type people that are in technology don't even consider working in the manufacturing world. They just think of it as this drab assembly line environment, when in fact, these companies are becoming so high tech, and they've taken a lot of cues from even like software companies, where how can they attract that talent to come work? Because these jobs pay great. Relative to other industries, in some cases pay, I don't know, I don't have this data, this is just more empirical evidence, but they got to be in the top quartile of where they pay for comparable skills and experience to use. So I think that's indicative of the industry, and some of the earlier slides we talked about is the inability to attract that talent into these spaces, because you can really grow your career. It satisfy your own thirst for developing yourself professionally, do amazing things with data science and artificial intelligence and machine learning, because I would argue that, of course, finance and stock markets and so forth, there's a lot of that going on in there. But man, oh man, if you look at what AI and machine learning can do for manufacturing to help intelligently predict when you should change that filter, or what's the reorder point for the parts you need to order and so forth, we need those people. And there's well-paying jobs to do that, and that's only going to increase.
Well, I certainly remember, this is years ago now, the first time I ever entered an engineering department. And what impressed me so much was it was one of the first times I had been in a workplace where everybody loved their work so much and were really just drawn to it. And that certainly, that distinction was very important for me in terms of deciding what I was going to do next. So there certainly is something to that, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So sorry to go off on a tangent there, but what I wanted to ask you was, in your impression, what is the most sought after thing in manufacturing?
In my impression, the most sought after thing in terms of from an employee who's looking to go work there, I think there's one slide in there, and there's some studies by Deloitte about culture that really impressed upon me, is manufacturers, especially right now, because it is so hard to attract talent, not only are you getting seeing great sign-on bonuses, but the flexibility in the workplace, the great benefits, and the attractive pay. Those attract people. When you're just scanning through an Indeed job search and you see those things, that's what brings you first in. So I would say, like, to the general public, those are probably the number one things. It doesn't stick, and we talked about in the webinar, but what excites me the most, I think, and we're a little early on this, and I have to get out my little crystal ball and read the tea leaves a little bit, but the trends in today's smart factory that we see, and the environment, especially for those middle skill and upper skilled positions, where you do get that excitement, like you talked about in an engineering firm, and like we see in software companies where we work. Now, I'm not sure that manufacturers are going to have ping pong tables and unlimited soda machines anytime soon, but those types of environments, manufacturers are starting to really recognize what it takes to attract people to stick around these positions in the long run. Because the days of the Chucks and Susans just staying in their roles for 20, 30, 40 years, we're just a different society. We just don't do that as much as we have to. So again, my crystal ball says that the industry is starting to shift in that way. But before that happens, it's the attractive pay and the good benefits and so forth that are really bringing the people over, where, at least in the initial way.
Yeah, I would say, looking at it really narrowly on the plant engineering side of it, we see the most interest in anything electrical, and then, of course, motors and drives. There's a lot of interest.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were looking for specifics. Your data would be much more appropriate than mine, Kevin, on that front. So I'm not going to argue with you on that.
Yeah, no problem. We're coming to the end of our broadcast day, as they say. So I would ask you just one final question. Do you see very much overlap between the reports of supply chain disruptions we're seeing in the press coming out of the pandemic, and how do those have any relationship to the shortage of workers that we're seeing coming out of the pandemic?
Definitely. The shortage of workers is impacting all aspects of the supply chain. So that's the same way manufacturers are having a hard time attract people for the reasons we talked about, supply chain oriented distribution networks and so forth. I think the larger impact in the supply chain is coming from the reshoring, onshoring. We're kind of scrambling to find our supplies, or we might have gone to China or other places in the Far East, which it just got flat out difficult originally with the U.S.-China trade war tariff issue, but later it was completely exasperated through travel restrictions and so forth. So I think just the general impact of the pandemic was the big wham on the supply chain. But, it doesn't matter what industrially oriented organization you work for. It's hard finding people, and the pandemic caused a lot of turbulence. So, yeah, they're looking for people just like everybody is looking for people. At the end of the day, whether it's supply chain or it's just optimizing your workforce, using your technology, CMMS is a great one, or even around supply chain, manage your reorder points appropriately, be alerted with your mobile device when you're low on parts, get all that information right in your fingertips so you can operate more intelligently to make up for those challenges with supply chain.
Good. Well, thanks, Paul. And here's some of the people at Dude Solutions that are relevant to this conversation. I'd like to thank the audience for their questions. I'd also like to extend special thanks to our sponsor, Dude Solutions, for sponsoring today's event. And now that we're just about done, we want to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it, because we use this information to improve our webcast. Finally, on behalf of Plant Engineering and Dude Solutions, I'd like to thank you for attending. This concludes our webcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.